She mistook the CEO for a janitor, but his quiet kindness sparked a life-changing connection. What unfolds will warm your heart. Before we dive in, drop a comment with your city to join the journey. At the end, rate this inspiring tale of courage and care from 0 to 10. Get ready for Catherine and Quentin's unforgettable story. The office was a battlefield of muted chaos, a sprawling grid of cubicles under the cold glare of fluorescent lights that buzzed like a swarm of restless bees. Catherine Moore stood at the edge of it all, her heart pounding in her chest, her blonde hair scraped into a messy bun that was unraveling as fast as her composure. The clock on the wall read 8:47 a.m., and the weight of the morning pressed against her like a physical force. In 13 minutes, her manager would expect a pristine report. 3 weeks of late nights, missed bedtime stories with her 5-year-old daughter, Lily, and endless cups of bitter coffee, stacked neatly on his desk. But the printer, a hulking beast in the corner of the office, had other plans. Its screen flashed a taunting message in stark black letters. Paper jam, tray 3 yes. Catherine's fingers trembled as she yanked at the tray, her nails catching on the plastic edge. She muttered a curse under her breath, sharp and uncharacteristic, her voice swallowed by the hum of keyboards and the distant murmur of a conference call. The tray refused to budge, as if it had decided to be her nemesis. She slammed it shut, then opened it again, hoping sheer desperation might coax the machine into submission. It didn't. Her blouse, already damp at the collar from the sprint across the parking lot, clung to her skin. She hadn't slept properly in days. Her nights spent hunched over spreadsheets while Lily slept in the next room. Her tiny snores a reminder of the life Catherine was barely holding together. At 31, Catherine was a single mother clawing her way through a world that seemed designed to remind her of her fragility. 3 years ago, she'd been a stay-at-home mom, her days filled with finger paint masterpieces and dinosaur-shaped sandwiches. Then came the divorce, Tom's betrayal, the court dates, the suffocating silence of her parents' disapproval. Now, she was an admin on a 1-year contract at one of the largest tech firms in the city, a place where glass walls gleamed with ambition and no one bothered to learn her name. They called her admin, or worse, nothing at all. She was invisible, a cog in a machine that churned out innovation while grinding down souls. The printer beeped again, a mocking chirp that snapped her back to the present. She pressed her palms to her temples, willing the tears to stay locked behind her eyes. She couldn't cry here, not in the open-plan office where every glance felt like a judgment. Her report, a meticulous analysis of user engagement metrics, was her ticket to proving she belonged. Proof she wasn't just the woman who fetched coffee or fixed typos. If she missed this deadline, her manager, a man with a smile as cold as the marble floors upstairs, would have another reason to overlook her for a permanent role. She tried the tray again, her movements frantic now, her breath hitching. A coworker brushed past, muttering, "If you're done wrestling with that thing, some of us need it." Catherine flinched, stepping aside. "Sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She hugged her files to her chest, the edges of the folder digging into her ribs. The coworker, a woman with sharp heels and sharper eyes, didn't even glance back as she jabbed at the printer's buttons. Catherine's stomach twisted, not from hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's half sandwich, but from the familiar sting of failure. She was 31, with a daughter who deserved better than a mother who could barely afford their 1-bedroom apartment, its walls thin enough to hear the neighbors' arguments. She stared at the printer, willing it to relent, her fingers hovering over the power button as if it were a lifeline. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Just this once." The machine didn't care. It sat there, smug and silent, its error message blinking like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes, picturing Lily's face, those wide brown eyes, the gap-toothed grin that made every sacrifice worth it. But the image only sharpened the ache in her chest. She was failing her daughter, failing herself, failing at this job she'd fought so hard to keep. The office buzzed on, oblivious. Phones rang, keyboards clacked, and somewhere, someone laughed. A sound so foreign to Catherine's morning that it felt like a slap. She opened her eyes, her gaze falling on the printer's defiant screen. She wanted to scream, to smash the machine into pieces, but she didn't. She never did. She swallowed the urge, tucking it away like she tucked away her dreams, her fears, her voice. Then, a shadow fell across the printer. A voice, low and calm, broke through the haze. "Need a hand?" Catherine spun around, startled, her breath catching. A man stood there, mid-30s, with tousled blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her panic. His faded jeans and rolled-up flannel shirt marked him as out of place in this sea of polished suits and smartwatches. He carried a toolbox in one hand, a faint smirk playing on his lips. No badge, no clipboard, just a quiet confidence and the faint scent of pine soap. "It's not personal," he said, crouching beside the printer. "Machines just like to test us." His voice was steady, almost amused, as if the chaos of her morning was nothing more than a puzzle to solve. Catherine stepped back, clutching her files tighter. "I think this one's winning," she muttered, her voice thin with exhaustion. He chuckled, a low, warm sound that felt like a momentary reprieve. His hands, calloused but precise, moved over the printer, opening a hidden panel she hadn't even noticed. She watched, half expecting him to fail, but he didn't. His fingers worked with a kind of effortless skill, coaxing the machine back to life. Within moments, he pulled out a crumpled sheet, the culprit of her misery, and the printer hummed to life. The first crisp page slid out, and Catherine felt her knees weaken with relief. "You're a miracle worker," she said, her voice softening, a faint smile breaking through her tension. He glanced up, his blue eyes meeting hers for a fleeting second. "Just passing through. Name's Quentin," he said, standing and wiping his hands on a cloth from his back pocket. Before she could respond, he was gone, vanishing down the hallway as silently as he'd appeared, leaving her with a working printer and a strange, lingering warmth in her chest. Catherine Moore stood frozen, the hum of the printer filling the void left by the stranger's departure. The crisp report pages slid into the tray, each one a small victory snatched from the jaws of her chaotic morning. Her fingers, still trembling from the adrenaline of near failure, clutched the warm stack as if it were a lifeline. The clock on the wall ticked past 8:50 a.m., leaving her mere minutes to sprint to the 15th floor for the meeting. But her mind lingered on the man, Quentin, he'd said, his tousled blonde hair, his calloused hands, the way his blue eyes had met hers with a quiet intensity that felt like a pause in the storm. He'd been out of place in this sterile office, with its glass walls and polished ambition. Yet he'd fixed her crisis with an ease that bordered on miraculous. She shook her head, shoving the thought aside. There was no time for distractions, not when her job hung by a thread. She gathered the report, her heels clicking against the linoleum as she hurried to the elevator. The office buzzed around her, phones trilling, keyboards clacking, the faint drone of a manager's voice from a nearby cubicle. Catherine's blouse clung to her skin, the dampness at her collar a reminder of her frantic morning. She pressed the elevator button, her reflection staring back from the steel doors, blonde hair fraying from its bun, green eyes shadowed with exhaustion. At 31, she felt older than her years, worn thin by the weight of single motherhood, a divorce that had gutted her, and a job that demanded everything while offering little in return. The elevator dinged and she stepped inside, clutching the report like a shield. The 15th floor was a different world, all sleek lines and muted wealth. The meeting room's glass walls framed a table of executives, their suits crisp, their expressions unreadable. Catherine slipped in, placing the report in front of her manager, Mr. Caldwell. whose nod was as curt as his smile was absent. She took her seat at the edge of the room, invisible as always, her role limited to note-taking and silent compliance. The discussion droned on. Metrics, synergies, deliverables, words that felt like bricks piling onto her chest. She scribbled notes, her mind drifting back to the printer, to Quentin's calm voice. "It's not personal. Machines just like to test us." Something was grounding in his words, a simplicity that cut through the chaos of her morning. She wondered who he was. Maintenance, maybe? Or a contractor? No one in this building wore jeans, not unless they were mopping floors or fixing pipes. The meeting ended, and Catherine returned to her cubicle, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across her desk. She sank into her chair, her body heavy with the kind of fatigue that went beyond sleepless nights. Lily's face flashed in her mind. Her daughter's gap-toothed grin, the way she'd clung to Catherine's leg that morning, whispering, "Don't go, Mommy." The memory twisted like a knife. She opened her email, hoping for a distraction, but found only a flood of tasks. Expense reports, meeting schedules, a reminder to order coffee for the break room. Her contract was up in 6 months, and every day felt like a test she wasn't sure she'd pass. Her gaze drifted to the printer in the corner, now silent and obedient. She could still picture Quentin crouching beside it, his hands moving with a craftsman's precision, as if the machine were an old friend he knew how to coax. She'd been too frazzled to thank him properly, too caught up in her panic. Now, in the quiet aftermath, she felt a pang of regret. He'd seen her at her worst, muttering, frantic, on the verge of tears, and yet he'd spoken to her with a kindness she wasn't used to. Not here, where smiles were calculated and conversations were transactions. She pushed the thought away and opened a spreadsheet, her fingers moving mechanically across the keyboard. But the office felt different now, as if Quentin's presence had left a crack in its cold facade. She glanced at the hallway where he'd disappeared, half expecting to see him again. But it was empty, lined with the same gray carpet and framed mission statements that no one read. The morning wore on, a blur of emails and phone calls, until a coworker, Sarah, stopped by her desk. "You got that report in on time?" Sarah asked, her tone clipped, her eyes scanning Catherine like she was looking for a flaw. "Barely," Catherine replied, forcing a smile. Sarah nodded, already turning away. "Good. Caldwell's in a mood today." Catherine's stomach twisted. She knew Sarah's type. 10 years at the company, a senior admin who wielded her tenure like a weapon. Catherine had learned to keep her head down, to avoid the subtle jabs and whispered judgments. But today, after Quentin's quiet intervention, she felt a flicker of defiance. She wasn't just the invisible admin. Not this morning. She'd survived the printer's betrayal, delivered the report, and kept her composure. It wasn't much, but it was something. Lunch came and went, a granola bar eaten at her desk while she answered emails. The office emptied slightly, the hum softening as people drifted to the break room or out for coffee. Catherine stayed put, her eyes burning from the screen. She was about to close her laptop when a shadow fell across her desk. She looked up, expecting Sarah or another coworker, but it was a maintenance worker, not Quentin, but an older man with a clipboard. "Printer acting up again?" he asked, nodding toward the corner. Catherine shook her head. "It's fine now. Someone fixed it this morning." The man raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, nobody from my crew was up here today." Her brow furrowed. "He said his name was Quentin. Blonde hair, jeans, toolbox." The man shrugged. "Doesn't ring a bell. Must have been a contractor." Catherine nodded, but a strange unease settled in her chest. She turned back to her screen, the numbers blurring as her mind replayed the encounter. Quentin's voice, his steady hands, the way he'd looked at her, not with pity, but with something closer to recognition. It was absurd, she told herself, to dwell on a stranger who'd spent 5 minutes in her life. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen her, really seen her, in a way no one in this office ever had. The afternoon dragged, a marathon of mundane tasks. By 4 p.m., her back ached, and her head throbbed from the strain of keeping up. She glanced at the clock, counting the hours until she could pick up Lily from preschool, hug her close, and pretend for a few hours that the world wasn't so heavy. As she packed her bag, her fingers brushed the edge of the report, now safely filed away. She paused, her eyes drifting to the printer again. It sat there, unassuming, as if it hadn't nearly derailed her entire day. She smiled faintly, a spark of resilience flickering in her chest. She'd made it through the morning, thanks to a stranger named Quentin. Tomorrow she'd face the machine again, and maybe, just maybe, she'd face it with a little less fear. The fluorescent lights of the office seemed harsher the next morning, their cold glow amplifying the knot in Catherine Moore's stomach. She sat at her cubicle, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, the memory of yesterday's printer fiasco still sharp. Quentin's brief presence, his calm voice, his steady hands, had lingered in her mind like a half-remembered dream, a fleeting moment of human connection in a place that thrived on detachment. But the maintenance worker's words had unsettled her. Nobody from my crew was up here today. Who was Quentin then? A contractor, as the man had suggested, or something else entirely? She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the spreadsheet before her, its rows of numbers a safe distraction from the questions circling her mind. At 9:45 a.m., a soft ping broke her concentration. An email appeared in her inbox, stark and unadorned. Report to the executive suite, 10 a.m. No subject line, no signature, just a single line that felt like a guillotine. Catherine's breath caught, her pulse quickening. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more dire than the last. Had someone overheard her muttering about Mr. Caldwell's icy demeanor during the printer meltdown? Or was it the expense report she'd submitted late last week, a mistake she'd scrambled to correct? Her contract was precarious, a one-year lifeline that could be severed with a single misstep. She glanced at the clock, 10 minutes to prepare for whatever awaited her. She stood, smoothing her blouse, its faint wrinkles a testament to her rushed morning. Lily had been clingy at drop-off, her small hands tugging at Catherine's coat, her voice a soft plea. "Stay, Mommy." The memory tightened Catherine's chest as she grabbed her notepad and headed for the elevator. The ride to the 15th floor felt endless, the steel walls reflecting her pale face, her blonde hair still fraying from its bun. She rehearsed apologies in her head, each one more desperate than the last, but none felt sufficient. The doors slid open, revealing a world far removed from the cubicle grid below. The executive suite was all warm wood and soft lighting, the air carrying a faint scent of leather and cedar. A receptionist with a polished smile greeted her. "Ms. Moore, Mr. Hayes is expecting you." "Hayes?" The name didn't register, but the receptionist's tone left no room for questions. Catherine followed her down a corridor, lined with sleek glass walls, her heels sinking into plush carpet. Her palms grew clammy, her notepad a flimsy shield against the unknown. The double doors at the end opened with a soft click, and there, behind a massive desk, stood a man in a tailored navy suit. His blonde hair was neatly combed, his blue eyes sharp and familiar. Catherine froze, her breath hitching. "You!" The word escaped before she could stop it. Quentin Hayes smiled, a small, disarming curve of his lips. "Yes, Catherine. Please, sit." He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk, his posture relaxed but commanding. She sank into the seat, her mind scrambling to reconcile the man before her with the one in jeans and flannel who'd fixed the printer. No toolbox now, just a sleek pen in his hand and a presence that filled the room. Her heart pounded, a mix of confusion and dread. Was this a reprimand disguised as a meeting? Had she said something yesterday, in her frazzled state, that had landed her in trouble? "You're not in trouble," Quentin said, as if reading her thoughts. He leaned against the edge of his desk, arms crossed casually, his suit jacket pulling slightly at the shoulders. "I owe you an explanation. I've been walking the floors for weeks. No badge, no title, just listening, watching. This company's grown fast, profits up, innovation soaring, but it's losing something, humanity." His voice was steady, but there was a weight to it, a conviction that made Catherine sit up straighter. "Yesterday I saw you. You were fighting that printer like it was a personal vendetta. But you didn't give up. You smiled at a coworker who ignored you, helped an intern with a password reset, and spoke with a raw honesty most people here bury under jargon." Catherine's cheeks flushed. She remembered her words by the printer, a tired rant about the office's coldness, its empty smiles. Had he heard that? "I didn't know anyone was listening," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Quentin's eyes softened, but they didn't waver. "That's the point. You weren't performing. You were real. That's rare." He paused, letting the words settle. "I'm starting a task force, Project Phoenix, to rebuild how we connect here. Empathy, inclusion, real leadership. I want you on it." Her breath caught. "Me?" The word came out sharper than she intended, laced with disbelief. "I'm just an admin." Quentin shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You're someone who shows up, even when it's hard. You keep going, even when no one notices. That's not just anything. That's leadership." His words landed like stones in still water, rippling through her doubt. She wanted to argue, to point out her lack of experience, her precarious contract. But something in his gaze stopped her, a certainty that made her feel seen, not as an admin, but as a person. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her fingers tightening around her notepad. "Say yes," Quentin said simply, his tone light but firm. She hesitated, her mind flashing to Lily, to the apartment she could barely afford, to the years she'd spent shrinking herself to fit into this world. But there was something in Quentin's voice, in the way he looked at her, that felt like a door cracking open. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yes," Quentin nodded, standing. "Good. Wednesday, 8:30 a.m., conference room B. Come as you are." He walked her to the door, his hand brushing the handle as he held it open. She stepped into the corridor, her heart still racing, but not from fear. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of possibility, fragile but real. As the elevator doors closed behind her, she glanced back, catching Quentin's silhouette through the glass. He was watching her, not with judgment, but with something akin to faith. The doors shut, and she exhaled, the weight of the morning lifting, if only slightly. Catherine Moore stepped out of the elevator, the echo of Quentin Hayes' words trailing her like a shadow. "You're someone who shows up, even when it's hard. That's leadership." The 15th floor's polished calm felt worlds away from her cubicle's fluorescent grind, and as the doors slid shut behind her, she clutched her notepad tighter, her heart still racing from the unexpected summons. She'd said yes to Project Phoenix, a task force to rebuild the company's culture. But doubt gnawed at her. She was an admin, a single mother scraping by, not someone who shaped corporate futures. Yet Quentin's certainty, his steady blue eyes, his quiet conviction had cracked open something inside her, a fragile hope she hadn't dared entertain in years. Wednesday morning arrived with a gray drizzle outside her apartment window, mirroring the nervous churn in her stomach. Lily, her 5-year-old daughter, had woken with a cough, her small body curled against Catherine's as they shared a hurried breakfast of toast and jam. "You'll be back soon, right, Mommy?" Lily asked, her brown eyes wide. Catherine kissed her forehead, promising a quick return, but the weight of leaving her at preschool lingered as she drove to work. The office was its usual hum of keyboards and muted conversations, but today felt different. At 8:25 a.m., Catherine stood outside Conference Room B, her second-best blouse ironed, her blonde hair neatly pinned. She smoothed her skirt, her fingers trembling slightly, and pushed open the glass door. The room was small, intimate, with a long table and 5 chairs occupied by an eclectic mix. A software engineer with a nervous tick, a marketing analyst with a sharp smile, a facilities manager with a weathered notebook, and a junior HR rep who kept adjusting her glasses. Quentin sat at the head, his navy suit traded for a dark sweater, his blonde hair slightly tousled, as if he'd just run a hand through it. "Morning, Catherine," he said, pulling out a chair for her himself. His voice was warm, unhurried. "We don't do formalities here. We do truth." She sat, her notepad a shield, her pulse loud in her ears. The others nodded, their expressions a mix of curiosity and caution. Quentin leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Project Phoenix is about rebuilding how we connect. Empathy, inclusion, real listening. This company's losing its soul, and we're here to find it." His words were direct, but his tone invited, not commanded. He asked each person to share one thing they'd change about the workplace. The engineer spoke of rigid hierarchies, the analyst of siloed teams. Catherine listened, her pen still, her mind racing. When her turn came, she hesitated, her throat tight. The room waited, Quentin's gaze steady but patient. "Sometimes," she said softly, "people don't quit because of work. They quit because they feel invisible." The words hung in the air, raw and unpolished. Quentin nodded once, scribbling them down word for word, his pen moving with deliberate care. The meeting stretched on, ideas bouncing like sparks. Quentin didn't dominate. He asked questions, let silences linger until someone filled them. Catherine stayed quiet after her contribution, her heart still pounding from speaking up. She'd spent years blending into the background, her voice reserved for Lily's bedtime stories or whispered apologies to coworkers. But here, in this glass-walled room, she felt a shift, subtle but undeniable. As the meeting ended, Quentin caught her eye. "Good start," he said, his smile brief but genuine. She nodded, her cheeks warm, and left the room feeling lighter, as if she'd shed a layer of invisibility. The next morning, a cup of coffee waited on her desk, black, 2 sugars, exactly how she liked it. Tucked beneath the cardboard sleeve was a note in tight, slanted handwriting. "Thanks for seeing what others don't. Q." Catherine stared at it, her breath catching. No one had ever thanked her for something so intangible, so personal. She tucked the note into her bag, her fingers lingering on the paper, and returned to her work with a quiet resolve. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of meetings and tasks. But Project Phoenix became a beacon. Each Wednesday, she entered Conference Room B with a little less hesitation, her notepad filling with ideas she hadn't dared voice before. By the second week, she spoke again, her voice clearer. "Burnout isn't just workload," she said, her eyes meeting Quentin's briefly. "It's when no one acknowledges you're human." The HR rep nodded, scribbling furiously. The facilities manager murmured agreement. Quentin wrote her words down again, his expression unreadable but attentive. After the meeting, another coffee appeared, this time with a note. "Your voice matters. Keep using it. Q." Catherine's chest tightened, not with fear but with something unfamiliar, pride. She was starting to see herself differently, not as the admin who fetched coffee, but as someone whose thoughts could shape something bigger. Outside the meetings, the office remained a minefield. Sarah, the senior admin, cast sidelong glances, her tone sharp when Catherine passed her in the break room. "Don't get too comfortable," Sarah muttered once, her words slicing through Catherine's newfound confidence. But Quentin's notes, his quiet encouragement, anchored her. She began to notice small changes. The engineer from the task force smiled at her in the hallway. The HR rep asked her opinion on a new policy draft. For the first time, she wasn't just a shadow moving through the office. One evening, as she packed up to leave, Quentin appeared at her cubicle, his sweater sleeves rolled up, his presence as unassuming as it had been by the printer. "You're doing well," he said, leaning against the partition. "Phoenix needs people like you, people who see the gaps others miss." Catherine looked up, surprised. "I'm just trying to keep up," she admitted. He shook his head. "You're doing more than that. You're reminding us why we're here." His words were simple, but they landed like a spark, igniting something in her she hadn't felt in years: purpose. As she drove to pick up Lily, the drizzle had cleared, the sky a soft pink. She thought of Quentin's notes, his steady gaze, and the way he listened without judgment. Project Phoenix was more than a task force. It was a chance to be seen, to matter. For the first time in years, Catherine felt the edges of her world expanding, her fears loosening their grip. She didn't know what lay ahead, but as she pulled into the preschool parking lot, Lily's laughter echoing in the distance, she felt ready to find out. Catherine Moore pulled into the preschool parking lot, the echo of Lily's laughter a balm to the day's intensity. Quentin's words from earlier, "You're reminding us why we're here," still hummed in her chest, mingling with the warmth of the coffee notes he'd left on her desk. Project Phoenix had awakened something in her, a fragile confidence that felt both thrilling and precarious. She was no longer just the admin who faded into the office's fluorescent hum. She was a voice, however small, in a room that mattered. But as she buckled Lily into her car seat, her daughter's chatter filling the air, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that her newfound visibility came with a cost. Back at the office the next morning, the air felt heavier, charged with an undercurrent she couldn't quite place. Her cubicle, once a sanctuary of routine, now felt exposed, as if eyes lingered on her from across the open-plan floor. She opened her email to find the company newsletter, her quote from the last Phoenix meeting staring back. "Burnout isn't just workload. It's when no one acknowledges you're human." Her name was printed beneath it, bold and undeniable. Her stomach twisted. She'd submitted the line anonymously, but someone, Quentin perhaps, had attached her name. Pride warred with unease. Being seen was exhilarating, but it also made her a target. By mid-morning, the whispers began. She caught them in fragments as she refilled her water bottle in the break room. "She's cozying up to the boss," Sarah, the senior admin, muttered to a colleague, her voice low but sharp enough to cut. "Thinks she's special now, with her little task force." The other woman, a payroll clerk named Diane, snorted. "Probably angling for a promotion. You know how it goes when the CEO takes a shine to someone." Catherine froze, her hand tightening around the bottle, the plastic crinkling under her grip. She blinked hard, forcing herself to walk back to her desk, her cheeks burning. She'd spent years avoiding attention, blending into the background to escape judgment. Now, her voice, her truth, was being twisted into something sordid. She sat, staring at her screen, the numbers blurring as Sarah's words looped in her mind. Had she been naive to think her contributions to Project Phoenix would go unnoticed? She glanced at the coffee cup from yesterday, Quentin's note tucked safely in her bag. "Your voice matters. Keep using it." It had felt like a lifeline, but now it seemed like a spotlight she hadn't asked for. The office buzzed on, oblivious to her turmoil, but every sidelong glance from a coworker felt like a needle prick. She wanted to shrink back, to return to the safety of invisibility, but the memory of Quentin's steady gaze, his quiet faith in her, held her upright. Lunch was a tense affair, Catherine joined the Phoenix team in the cafeteria, hoping for camaraderie. But the table was quiet, the air thick with unspoken dynamics. The engineer, Mark, offered a small smile, but Sarah was there too, her presence like a storm cloud. "Nice quote in the newsletter," Sarah said, her tone saccharine. "Didn't know you were such a poet." The words were a jab, and Catherine's fork paused midair. "Just something I said in the meeting," she replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Must be nice, having the CEO's ear." The table fell silent, and Catherine felt the weight of every gaze. She was about to respond when Quentin appeared, his dark sweater and rolled sleeves a stark contrast to the cafeteria's fluorescent glare. He didn't sit, just stood at the edge of the table, his presence commanding without effort. "This company values courage," he said, his voice calm but firm, his eyes sweeping the group but lingering on Sarah. "Those who speak the truth move us forward. Those who don't get left behind." The words weren't directed at anyone, but their meaning was clear. Sarah's face reddened, and she busied herself with her phone. Diane adjusted her glasses, avoiding eye contact. Quentin nodded at Catherine, a fleeting gesture, and walked away, leaving a charged silence in his wake. The next morning, an email from HR announced mandatory empathy training, led by the executive team. Catherine's inbox also held something else. A small white box tied with a gold ribbon left on her desk. Inside were lemon cookies, her favorite, though she'd never told anyone at work. A folded note read, "We're sorry. You're braver than us." The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the gesture softened the edges of her hurt. She looked up and caught Sarah watching from across the floor. Their eyes met, and Sarah gave a tiny nod, almost imperceptible. It wasn't friendship, but it was a start. By afternoon, the cafeteria felt different. Mark invited Catherine to join him and Diane for takeout, and she hesitated only a moment before accepting. Over sandwiches and fruit cups, they talked about kids, late-night emails, and the absurdity of the office's coffee machine. The conversation was tentative at first, but laughter crept in, loosening the tension. Sarah didn't join, but later, she tapped Catherine's desk, dropping off a coffee. "Truce," she said, half joking. Catherine smiled, her voice light. "I think we're past that." The whispers didn't vanish entirely, but they dulled, overshadowed by small acts of connection. The HR rep from Phoenix asked Catherine's advice on a policy draft. Mark shared a joke about the printer that made her laugh for the first time in days. Project Phoenix meetings grew livelier, Catherine's ideas flowing more freely. She suggested a peer recognition program, and Quentin wrote it down, his pen moving with that same deliberate care. After one meeting, he stopped her in the hallway. "That line about invisibility," he said. "It's going in the next newsletter. It deserves to be heard." Her cheeks warmed, but she didn't look away. "Really?" she asked. He nodded, his blue eyes steady. "Really?" As she drove home that evening, Lily's chatter filling the car, Catherine felt a shift. The office was still a battlefield, but she was no longer just surviving it. She was building something, alliances, however fragile, and a voice that was starting to feel like her own. Quentin's notes, his quiet defense, had given her a foothold, but it was her own courage, small and steady, that kept her standing. Tomorrow, she'd walk into Conference Room B with her head a little higher, ready to face whatever came next. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the preschool parking lot as Catherine Moore pulled in, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Project Phoenix had become a quiet anchor, its meetings a space where her voice, once buried under years of self-doubt, was starting to take root. Quentin's steady encouragement, the coffee, the notes, his unwavering nod during her suggestions, had kindled a spark of confidence she hadn't known she could reclaim. Even the office, with its fading whispers and tentative alliances, felt less like a battlefield. Sarah's coffee, Mark's jokes, the lemon cookies. They were small bridges, fragile but real, connecting her to a world she'd long felt excluded from. As she stepped out of her car, Lily's laughter echoed from the playground, a sound that usually melted her worries. But today, that melody was cut short. A black SUV loomed at the curb, its polished surface glinting under the fading light. Leaning against it was a figure she'd hoped to never see again. Tom, her ex-husband. His blonde hair was slicked back, his pressed shirt and slacks a stark contrast to the man she'd once known, whose charm had masked a controlling edge. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto hers as she approached. "Well, well," he said, straightening up, his voice smooth but laced with venom. "Fancy job, fancy life now, huh? Must be nice." Catherine's heart sank, her hand tightening around her keys. She pulled Lily close, her daughter's small frame pressing against her leg. "I'm just here to pick up my kid," she said flatly. "Leave." Tom smirked, unfazed, and pulled a folded paper from his pocket, waving it like a weapon. "Relax, Catherine. I'm not here to cause a scene. Just thought we should settle some things like adults." His tone was patronizing, the same one he'd used during their marriage to make her feel small. "See, I've been thinking. All those years you made my life hell. Controlling, critical, cold. I deserve something for that." Her lips parted, disbelief sharpening her voice. "You? What?" He stepped closer, his smile widening. 30 grand. Call it compensation. Emotional damage, whatever you like. You can afford it now, right? Big tech job, cozying up with some hotshot. Catherine's breath hitched, her grip on Lily tightening. "I'm not giving you a dime," she snapped, her voice shaking but resolute. Tom's eyes narrowed, his smile turning cruel. "Then maybe I'll file for custody. Tell the court how unstable you've been. Depression, no family support, a new boyfriend meddling. You know how that looks." Lily tugged at her coat, confused, her small voice whispering, "Mommy?" Catherine ushered her toward the preschool door without breaking eye contact with Tom. "Stay away from us," she said, her voice low but firm, and hurried inside, her heart pounding like a drum. That night, her apartment was a cage of restless shadows. Lily slept fitfully, curled under a quilt, while Catherine paced the living room, the glow of a single lamp casting her silhouette against the wall. She hadn't slept, her mind replaying Tom's threats, his smug certainty that he could unravel her life again. She had no concrete proof of his past manipulation, no restraining order, no documented threats, just years of quiet control that had eroded her sense of self. At 2 a.m., she sank to the bathroom floor, the door locked, the light off, her knees pulled to her chest. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her hands gripping her temples. She stared at her reflection in the mirror across from her, eyes red, blonde hair falling loose, shoulders tense. But beneath the fear, a flicker of resolve stirred. "I left once," she whispered to herself. "I can stand again." The next day at work, Catherine wore a brave face, her smile practiced but brittle. She moved through her tasks mechanically, her fingers typing emails while her mind churned with Tom's words. Project Phoenix's weekly meeting loomed, but she felt like an imposter, her newfound confidence crumbling under the weight of her past. Quentin noticed. As the meeting ended, he lingered in conference room B, his blue eyes searching hers as the others filed out. "You're quiet today," he said, his voice gentle but probing. She hesitated, her throat tight. She wanted to brush it off, to hide behind her usual mask, but his steady gaze disarmed her. The words spilled out before she could stop them. Tom's confrontation, the blackmail, the threat to take Lily. Quentin listened, his expression shifting from concern to something fiercer, a quiet fury that didn't need words. When she finished, her hands trembling, he stood, grabbing his coat from the chair. "Come with me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. She followed, unsure, as he led her to his car in the parking garage. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not the police," he said, starting the engine. "Not yet. You need someone who knows how to fight this." They drove to a discreet office downtown, its glass windows and polished floors exuding quiet authority. A brass sign read, "Shelton and Crane, Family Law." Inside, Quentin introduced her to Claire, a composed attorney in her 50s, with a handshake that felt like a promise. "I trust her," Quentin said, stepping back. "But I won't speak for you. You're in charge here." Catherine sat across from Claire, her hands still shaking but steadier now. She told her everything, the years of Tom's control, the guilt tripping, the subtle threats that had kept her silent, and now the blackmail. Claire listened intently, her pen moving across a legal pad. "We'll need evidence," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "Emails, voicemails, anything. I've seen men like him. We don't lose to men like him." As they left the office, Quentin handed her a cup of tea from a nearby cafe, its warmth seeping into her hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. You stood up today. I just drove." They stood in the lobby, the city's hum muffled beyond the glass. Catherine felt the weight of her past pressing against her, but Quentin's presence, quiet, steady, unwavering, was a reminder that she wasn't alone. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of strength, not just to survive, but to fight. Tomorrow, she'd face the world again, with Lily's hand in hers and a plan taking shape. The courtroom was a sterile cage, its pale walls and harsh fluorescent lights stripping away any warmth from the air. Catherine Moore sat rigid in her chair, her palms flat against her lap, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun that mirrored the knot in her stomach. Across the room, Tom, her ex-husband, sat with a calculated calm, his pressed shirt and clean-shaven jaw a facade of innocence. His eyes, cold and glinting, met hers briefly, and she felt the familiar chill of his presence, the same one that had once kept her silent through years of manipulation. But today was different. The weight of Claire's words, "We don't lose to men like him," and Quentin's quiet support anchored her, a lifeline against the storm of fear threatening to pull her under. She glanced at the third row, where Quentin sat, his dark sweater a stark contrast to the courtroom's bleakness, his blue eyes steady and unwavering. He hadn't come to speak, only to be there, a silent promise that she wasn't alone. The judge entered, a stern woman with gray hair and a gaze that seemed to weigh every soul in the room. The case was called, and Tom's attorney rose first, a slick man in a tailored suit who spun a tale as polished as it was venomous. "My client gave years to a marriage marred by Ms. Moore's instability," he declared, his voice smooth and practiced. "Her depression, her erratic behavior, her new relationship with a wealthy executive. It's clear she's unfit to provide a stable home for their daughter, Lily. Mr. Thompson seeks compensation for emotional distress and shared custody to ensure the child's well-being." Catherine's jaw clenched, her breath shallow but controlled. Each word was a distortion, a twisted mirror of the life she'd fought to rebuild after Tom's control had nearly broken her. Claire stood next, her presence a quiet counterpoint to the opposing counsel's theatrics. She wore no drama, only facts, her voice steady as she laid out the truth. "Mr. Thompson's history is one of coercion and manipulation," she began, holding up a printed email. "This message, sent 3 weeks ago, demands $30,000 in exchange for not pursuing custody. We have voicemails where he threatens Ms. Moore's stability, and a neighbor's sworn statement documenting his aggressive behavior outside her former residence. She placed the evidence before the judge. Each piece a brick in a wall Catherine had never thought she could build. The courtroom was silent, save for the faint rustle of papers and the judge's pen scratching notes. The judge's eyes flicked to Catherine. "Ms. Moore, would you like to speak?" The question landed like a stone, heavy and unyielding. Catherine's knees trembled as she stood, her hands gripping the edge of the table for balance. Her heart pounded, but she thought of Lily, her gap-toothed grin, her small hand clutching a paper star, and the resolve that had sparked in her bathroom's darkness weeks ago flared anew. She took a breath, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "For years, I stayed quiet," she began, her words clear, cutting through the room's sterile air. "I thought silence kept me and my daughter safe. I thought it protected us from his control, his threats, his way of making me feel like I was nothing. But silence didn't protect me. It protected him." Tom shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing, but Catherine didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on the judge, her voice growing stronger. "I'm not perfect. I've been afraid and I'm still afraid now, standing here. But I'm speaking because my daughter deserves a life free from fear, from manipulation, from a man who thinks love means control. I'm speaking because I deserve that too." The room was still, the weight of her words settling like dust after a storm. The judge's expression softened, a flicker of something like admiration in her eyes. Catherine sat, her legs weak, but her spine straight, her breath steady for the first time in days. She stole a glance at Quentin. His hands were clenched on the wooden armrest, his face a mix of pride and restrained fury, as if he wanted to stand and fight for her, but knew this was her battle. His nod was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried the same quiet strength as his presence at the printer months ago. The judge called a recess, and the room stirred, voices murmuring as people shuffled out. Catherine remained seated, her hands still trembling but lighter, as if speaking had unburdened a piece of her soul. Claire touched her arm, her voice low. "You did well. We've got this." Outside the courtroom, the hallway was a blur of footsteps and distant conversations. Quentin was there, waiting, his posture relaxed but his eyes intense. "You were incredible," he said quietly, handing her a cup of tea from a nearby vendor, its warmth seeping into her hands. Catherine blinked back tears, her voice barely a whisper. "No, I was just tired of being afraid." He nodded, his gaze unwavering, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the moment shared between them. He reached for her hand, not to guide or comfort, but to hold it, equal and steady, a gesture that felt like a vow. The judge returned, her ruling swift and final. Tom's petition for compensation was dismissed, and his custody request was denied. Based on the evidence, his threats, his history, a permanent no-contact order was issued. He was not to approach Catherine or Lily again. Catherine exhaled, the air leaving her lungs in a rush, as if she'd been holding her breath for years. Tom's face twisted, but he said nothing, his attorney ushering him out. Catherine stood, her legs unsteady, but her heart resolute. As she stepped into the hallway, Quentin at her side, the world felt sharper, clearer. She'd faced her past and won, not with anger, but with a courage she hadn't known she possessed. The fight was over, but the next chapter, her future, Lily's future, was just beginning. The courthouse hallway stretched before Catherine Moore like a tunnel of muted echoes, the clamor of other cases fading as she stepped out, her heart still racing from the judge's ruling. Tom's threats had been silenced, his claims dismissed, a no-contact order locking him out of her and Lily's lives. Quentin Hayes stood beside her, his hand warm around hers, not leading but grounding, a quiet anchor in the aftermath of her courtroom stand. His words, "You were incredible," lingered, soft but weighty, as they walked into the crisp morning air. The city hummed beyond the courthouse steps, oblivious to the seismic shift within her. She'd faced her past, not with rage, but with a courage forged in years of silence. And now, for the first time, the future felt like a canvas rather than a cage. Back at the office, the days that followed carried a new rhythm. Project Phoenix meetings were no longer a daunting stage, but a space where Catherine's voice flowed freely, her ideas, peer mentorship, wellness check-ins, shaping the company's evolving culture. The whispers from Sarah and others had faded, replaced by nods of respect and small gestures. A shared coffee break, a laugh over a jammed copier. Quentin's presence remained steady, his notes still appearing with her morning coffee, though now they carried a warmth that felt personal, not just professional. "You're changing this place," one read, and Catherine tucked it away, her chest tight with a pride she was learning to embrace. The year-end gala loomed, a tradition Catherine had always dreaded, a crowded room of forced smiles and name tags that never bore her name. But this year, the 15th floor atrium was transformed, bathed in candlelight, the air rich with a scent of cinnamon and soft jazz. A banner overhead read, "Celebrating growth, courage, and kindness." And for once, Catherine didn't feel like an outsider. She stood near the back, her navy dress simple but chosen with care, her blonde hair falling in loose waves. Lily was at a sleepover with a friend, leaving Catherine free to linger, though her heart tugged at the thought of her daughter's absence. Across the room, Quentin moved through the crowd, his dark sweater and rolled sleeves a nod to the man who'd fixed the printer months ago, not the CEO in a tailored suit. The HR director, a woman with a warm smile, took the microphone, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Tonight we introduce a new award," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "The Inspiration Award, for someone whose quiet courage changes everything." Catherine's breath caught as her name was called. The applause swelling like a wave, genuine and full, echoing deeper than the atrium's glass walls. Her legs felt unsteady as she walked to the podium, the crowd parting, their faces a mix of warmth and respect. Quentin met her there, holding a glass sculpture shaped like a rising flame, its edges catching the candlelight. He didn't hand it over immediately. Instead, he took her hand, his touch steady, and turned to the crowd. "I wasn't supposed to be here," Quentin began, his voice strong but warm. "Not at a podium, not fixing copiers. A CEO doesn't usually step into those moments. But some things are worth breaking the rules for." He turned to Catherine, his blue eyes locking with hers. "We need more people like Catherine, who see the unseen, who speak when it's hard, who remind us what this company can be. And I need her too." The room hushed, a gentle pause wrapping around his words. A soft whistle came from the crowd, followed by chuckles, but Quentin's gaze didn't waver, his hand still holding hers, not for show but for truth. Before Catherine could speak, a small figure in a blue dress darted through the crowd, her curls bouncing. "Mommy!" Lily called, clutching a paper star, her presence a surprise orchestrated by the friend's mother, who'd brought her to the gala. The crowd laughed, the tension breaking into warmth. Lily ran to the podium, her eyes wide. "Are you Mommy's friend, Mr. Quentin?" she asked, holding out the star. Quentin knelt, taking it gently, his smile soft but unguarded. "I'd like to be more if your mom says yes." Catherine's throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes, but she didn't hide them. She nodded, her voice caught in a smile. "We both say yes." The applause erupted again, louder, a wave of joy that drowned out the past's lingering shadows. Lily hugged Quentin's leg, her paper star crinkled but cherished in his hand. Catherine stood beside them, the glass flame heavy in her arms, its weight a reminder of the strength she'd found. The gala continued, but for her, the world narrowed to this moment. Quentin's quiet presence, Lily's laughter, the sense that she was no longer just surviving but living. Spring arrived early, and the park near Catherine's apartment bloomed in soft pinks and greens. Children played by the pond, their shouts mingling with the breeze. Catherine walked a quiet path, her hand intertwined with Quentin's, Lily skipping ahead, her paper star tied with a ribbon, flying in her small hands. The sun warmed the earth, and Catherine leaned into Quentin, her voice a whisper. "Did you ever think a broken printer would fix us?" He smiled, his eyes crinkling. "It found exactly who it needed to." They watched Lily twirl under falling petals, her laughter a melody that stitched their fractured pasts into something whole. The moment felt like a promise, not just of love, but of a life where Catherine was seen, not as an admin or a single mother, but as herself, flawed, brave, and enough. Quentin's hand tightened around hers, and she knew this was no fairy tale ending, but a beginning, built on small acts of courage and a bond that had grown from a single, unexpected kindness. As the golden light wrapped around them, the story wasn't over. It was unfolding, one step, one star, one heartbeat at a time. If Catherine and Quentin's journey, from a broken printer to a bond forged in courage, touched your heart, drop a comment below with your thoughts and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your voice matters. Thank you for joining us on this tale of resilience and connection. Stay tuned for more stories that inspire and uplift. See you next time.